What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp free tutorial. So in this series, we're going to start talking about how to use the free online version of SketchUp for woodworking applications. So if you're a woodworker and you want to learn to use SketchUp free, start here. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. So just as a note, there are two different versions of SketchUp. So there's the free online version, which is the free version you can access for hobby applications, and there's the pro desktop version, which you can download and you can use for more professional applications. For personal use, SketchUp free is licensed for that. And for commercial applications, more people use the desktop version. In this video, we're going to talk through how to use the free online version. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go to the products page and we're going to go down to SketchUp free. So when we click on SketchUp free, it's going to take us to this page right here where we can click on the button for Start Modeling. And so when we click on that, it's going to take us to a page where we log in. And so just enter your email address here. And if you already have a Trimble account, you can use this to log in. If you don't, then it'll take you to a page where you can sign up for a Trimble account. You do need a free Trimble account to access SketchUp free. But now we're going to click on the next button right here. We're going to sign in. And that's going to take us to this page. So we can also access this by typing in app.sketchup.com. And so from this page, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the button for Start Modeling. What that's going to do is that's going to pop up this page right here. And this is going to be the 3D workspace where we can model inside of SketchUp free. And so a couple quick navigation things. So your modeling tools are contained on the left-hand side over here. So things like your line tool, which you can use to draw a line, lots of different tools are contained over here. We're going to try to focus on using keyboard shortcuts wherever possible because it's going to be a lot faster. So on the right hand side, you have access to windows that you can open up that allow you to do different things. Like for example, this window gives you information about whatever you currently have selected. If you ever want this to go away, you can just click on the little arrow right here to make it go away. So some of these have features in here that you need to upgrade in order to use. Others have different tools. And notice how when you start opening these up, you can access different windows over here. And you can also close out the individual windows by clicking on the X button that you can hover over and see right here. And we can talk about these more in a future video, but I want you to be oriented. So at the bottom of the page, you have a bar that's going to give you information about your currently active tool. So you're going to find instructions on what to do with your currently active tool over here. And then on the right hand side, you're going to have a measurements bar, which is going to show information about what you're drawing. And so we'll talk about this more in a second. And then this is our 3D workspace where we're actually going to work with our 3D models. And so real quick, let's talk a little about navigation. So I always recommend that you use a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. And the reason why is because you can use the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in or out like this. So what I'm doing is I'm scrolling my mouse up and down. And notice how your mouse will zoom in when you scroll up based on where your mouse location is. It'll zoom out in the same way. So if you roll your mouse button up, it's going to zoom in. Roll it down, it's going to zoom out. In addition, if you click and hold that center mouse button on that mouse, you can orbit, meaning you can fly around a point inside of your model. So this 3-button mouse makes this really easy. If you do want to do this using your tools over here, you can click on this button right here in order to access these different tools. So for example, if I click on this, I can orbit. I can also select tools like pan, which means that I can then click and drag in order to move around. So you can access these over here. I almost always use my mouse in order to do this. So now let's talk a little bit, and there's some other things you can do as well. So for example, if you click and hold the center mouse button and then hold down the shift key, notice how you can use this in order to pan. So you can start putting those things together to navigate around rather quickly. We can talk about this more in the future if there are any questions. But for now, let's start drawing. So first thing we're going to do is activate the simplest tool inside of SketchUp, which is the line tool. So you can access that tool either by clicking on this button and clicking on the pencil, or by tapping the L key on your keyboard. I usually recommend tapping the L key in order to activate this. So one thing that's going to be really important is you need to understand that you don't usually use the drawing tools by clicking and holding down on your mouse button. So train yourself to do a single click with a tool active and then another click in order to close out the tool. So you can see how with the line tool active, for example, what I can do is I can click on a point, I can move my mouse, and I can click again in order to set a second point. And so notice how when I activate this tool, so if I tap the L key, you're going to get instructions on the lower left-hand corner on how to use this tool. So for example, this says, with the line tool active, select start point. So what that means is you click once in order to set your start point. Now, if you move your mouse again, notice how it says select endpoint or enter value. What that means is you can either click again in order to set the line, or if you look on the right-hand side of your page, notice how there's a length in that box. And once again, I want to emphasize I am not holding the mouse button down. I've single clicked and now I'm just moving my mouse around, but the mouse button is not held down. Well, what that means is that this is still waiting for a second point. Well, let's say I wanted this to be a 2-foot line. I can just type in a value of 2 feet and hit the enter key. And so you can see how when I hit the enter key, what this did is this drew a line 2 feet long between the first point that I had in here and the second point that I had in here, or in the direction that I had my mouse, that I had moved my mouse. And so you're going to use this in order to create precise measurements and precise lines inside of SketchUp. And so one thing I want you to get familiar with right now is if I tap the L key again and single click and move my mouse around, you're going to notice that you start getting these little like dotted lines and colors and other things like that. And so the colors are an indicator of the axis line that you're drawing along. So the axis lines are these colored lines contained inside of SketchUp that help us navigate the 3D space, right? Because otherwise, if I was to click like off in the distance right here, SketchUp really has no way of knowing if I want this to be like on this plane between these 2 points, if I want this to be down below that plane, anything like that. And so what we have is we have these colors in order to help us with that. And so green indicates that you're drawing parallel to this axis line. Red is going to indicate that you're drawing parallel to this axis line. So for example, if I was to draw a line in this direction, you can see how if I set my first point and then move my mouse, you can see how this kind of jumps and turns green, right? Well, the reason it jumps and it turns green is because it's showing me that I'm drawing along this axis. So same thing, if I was to set another point and move my mouse up like this, notice how I'm getting a blue indicator, indicating that I'm drawing on the blue axis. So I'm drawing up. And then if I was to do this again from this point, notice how I'm getting a red line, indicating that I'm drawing along the red axis. And so what this does is this allows us to orient both ourselves and our drawing tools inside of a 3D space. And so part of the reason this is going to be important, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but part of the reason this is going to be important is because you really want to draw on axis inside of SketchUp. Because otherwise, what can happen is you can draw a line that looks like it's on the green axis, but then if you kind of move your mouse over or up a little bit, you can draw this line that's slightly off axis. And so what can happen is, and I'm going to draw a little helper line in here just to make this a little bit easier, but what can happen is when you're drawing inside of SketchUp, you can draw a line from a point like this one, and you can move your mouse in this direction, and you can accidentally draw a line to a point that isn't on the same plane as your other edges. And what that means is that then you'll come in here and you'll draw your other edges, like this one, you'll draw them all along the axis, but then you'll have one edge that's slightly off. So what happens is your faces don't get generated because your edges get drawn slightly off axis. So it's really important most times to draw along these axes. That's going to be really important. And so one trick for that is when you have a tool like the line tool active, if you single click and then move your mouse, and notice how I have this tool active. So this only works if I've set my first point. If I tap the left arrow key, this will lock my line to the green axis. If I tap the right arrow key, it locks my line to the red axis. And if I tap the up arrow key, it locks my line to the blue axis. And so you can use this to force inferencing inside of SketchUp. So you can force tools to draw on certain faces or in certain directions by tapping those arrow keys. So, and we'll talk more about this in the future, but when you get to like the rectangle tool, you can do the same thing. So you can tap the left arrow key to lock this to the green axis, the up arrow key to lock it to flat. So you can lock those inferences using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So in addition, there's also inference points. So what an inference point is if I activate the line tool again, and we'll get off the line tool pretty soon, I promise. But if we activate the line tool and move our mouse over certain points on our lines, you can see how this turns different shapes and different colors. So the little point that we're going to draw on is turning these colors. And so what these indicate to us is these indicate different things about the edges. So for example, the little blue dot indicates that if I was to draw right here, I'd be drawing from a midpoint of a line. The little green dot means that I'd be drawing from the end point of a line. And then in addition, if I was to mouse over this midpoint and then move my mouse to the right, you're going to notice that I start getting these little dotted lines right here. So those are SketchUp trying to show us points that it thinks that we might want to draw from. So in this situation, the red line and the blue line are indicating that this would be a point at the intersection point between, if you were to draw a line off of these points, this is where they would intersect right here. So you can use this to find the center of objects and other things like that. We can talk a little bit more about these in the future. But for now, let's draw a different kind of line. So now, instead of drawing a line, let's draw an arc. So if we were to click on this right here, you can see how there's a number of different options in here for arcs. I almost always use the 2-point arc tool. And so you can use this either by clicking on this or by tapping the A key on your keyboard. And so if you single click and move your mouse, what this does is this allows you to set a single point, then click again, and move your mouse in order to set a bulge. So what this does is this allows you to create a curve. And so you can use this tool to create curves. Notice how if you move your mouse out, at a certain point this will kind of lock, it'll pause in here, and it'll give you a little indicator that says half circle. So what this means is if we were to draw this right here, this would be a perfect half circle. And notice how again, just like with the line tool, if you were to draw and then type in a value, you could create a circle with a diameter of 4 feet by typing in 4 feet and hitting the enter key, and then moving your mouse out, you could type in another value, like let's say 2 feet, in order to set a bulge of 2 feet. So notice how again we're single clicking and then typing in a value and hitting the enter key in order to set these values. So now let's talk about faces. So we've talked a little bit about edges and lines. Now let's talk about faces. So edges are just lines that show up inside of SketchUp, right? So if I draw 2 lines like this with the line tool, those are edges. Well, if I was to draw a line between this point and this point, notice that SketchUp is filling a face in between these edges. And so the reason for that is because we've created 2 or 3 or more coplanar edges. And so what that means is that these are edges that are on the same plane, right? So let's say that we were to draw 1, 2, 3, 4 edges and then close this in. Notice how as soon as we do this, this closes in this shape and this draws a face inside of these edges. Anytime you have 3 or more coplanar edges, SketchUp is going to draw a face. And so let's say that we were to draw a triangle like this one. And I'm going to draw an edge up. And then I'm going to erase out a corner real quick. So to do that, I can tap the E key to activate the erase tool. Then I can just click on this line in order to erase it. Well, notice how when I deleted that edge out, this face got deleted. Well, the reason for that is because we no longer have 3 or more coplanar edges, right? So these 2 edges are on the vertical plane right here. These edges are on the vertical plane right here. And these edges are on the flat plane right here. But nowhere do we have 3 coplanar edges. However, if I was to draw a line between this point and this point, you're going to get two faces that get drawn in here, right? So you get a face that's drawn between these edges because these are all on a flat plane, and you get a face between these edges because these are all on a flat plane. And so if you ever lose a face, because you can click on a face and then hit the delete key to delete it out, you can just draw over an edge in order to heal that face back in. So you're basically just redrawing this, and SketchUp reads this as a closed face, and it'll heal the face or place the face back in here. So now let's talk just a little bit about going to 3D, right? Because we've talked about lines and edges, we've talked about drawing to certain lengths. Well, now let's talk about creating something in 3 dimensions. And so we're going to do the simplest thing that we can do in order to do that. We're going to create a box. And so the way that I'm going to create a box is I'm going to tap the R key on my keyboard. That's going to activate a different kind of tool. That's going to activate a shape tool. Notice how we have a number of different shape tools in here, which we can talk about a little bit later. But if we were to single click right here and then move our mouse and click again, we could draw a rectangle. Notice how you can also single click, move your mouse in a direction, and then type in dimensions separated by a comma. So I could type in a value of 4 foot, comma, 4 foot, and hit the enter key in order to draw a 4 foot by 4 foot rectangle. And we can talk about those a little bit more in the future. But for right now, what I want to talk about is extruding, because you're going to use extruding a lot. So extruding is basically the method where we take a 2-dimensional object and we extrude it into 3 dimensions. So the way that's going to work is we're going to come over here and we're going to look at this and notice that we have 3 little tools inside of this push-pull toolbar. And we want to click on the first one, which is the push-pull tool. So notice how when I activate the push-pull tool, you can also tap the P key on your keyboard. But notice how if I mouse over faces, they turn a shaded color, right? So that means that if I was to single click, and again, do not click and drag, single click, and then move my mouse up and click again, you can see I can use this to extrude this flat shape into 3 dimensions. So what I've done is I've basically taken this face right here, and SketchUp will use the push-pull tool to move it up, and it'll also draw lines and faces inside of the perimeter of this shape. And so one thing that you're going to like about this is, first of all, you can extrude by distance. So let's undo that, and let's single click and say that we wanted this to be 2 feet tall. So this is why single clicking is important. If we activate the push-pull tool, mouse over this face, and single click, and then type in a value of 2 feet, what that's going to do is that's going to extrude this up 2 feet. So we can use this in order to precisely extrude shapes into 3 dimensions. Well, in addition, we can also use inferencing, and this is another power of the SketchUp tools as well as the push-pull tool. Is if I was to extrude this up, remember to single click, otherwise this won't work, move my mouse up, and then I was to mouse over this object, you can see how I can inference to a point. So if I wanted to quickly create something the same height as this box right here, I could single click on this face, move my mouse over to this point, and then click. And what that's going to do is that's going to extrude this so that it's the same length as the box next to it. So you can use inferencing in order to quickly align faces and make things the same size inside of SketchUp. So in addition, you can also use this to cut holes or remove material. So we've already used this to create material, but let's say we were to split this face. So let's say that we were to draw a line from this midpoint to this midpoint right here. Well, now what we've done is we've split this face, right? You can split a face into 2 faces by drawing a line across it. So what we can do is we can activate the push-pull tool, move over this face, and single click. And when I single click and I move my mouse, notice how I can use this in order to remove material. So right here, I could use this to remove material right here. I could do this again. So I could split this and then push-pull this back. And one thing I want you to notice is when I move this all the way to the back and I mouse over this point and I click on it, SketchUp is going to delete out the extra material. So you can use this in order to remove material without having to come back in and erase out those extra edges. So you can use the push-pull tool to remove material, as well as adding material. And notice how we also use this in order to cut holes. So let's say that we were to draw a circle on this face. So we're going to activate the circle tool by tapping the C key and mousing over this face. Then I'm going to single click, move my mouse out, and I'm going to click again. We'll notice how we've split this face with this circle into two faces. I can push-pull this in order to create a recess inside of my shape. But in addition, I could also single click here, rotate around using the orbit tool, and I can move my mouse until I click on this point right here. Well, notice how you can see your circle on the back side of this face. Well, if I single click, what that's going to do is that's going to create a hole through my object. Notice how to cut the hole in the back side of the object, you need to make sure you extrude it so that it's level with the back face. And so one other thing I want to show you in this video, and we will get into other things in future videos, but if you want to save your model in the free version, you can go up here and you see how there's a button right here that says to save. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to pop up a window asking you where you want to save this. And all of this lives inside of Trimble's cloud software. But what I want to do is I want to click in SketchUp, and then I've created a folder. But we could create another folder like woodworking, models, and click on create. And we can select that folder. We can name our model. So in this case, we'll just name this Getting Started and click on Save here. So that way, in the future, after this is done saving, you can see how this is going through and this says saving, and then when it's done, it says saved. You can click up here and go to Open. And then inside of Trimble Connect, we're going to click on SketchUp, Woodworking, and your model is going to show up right here. So you can save all of these inside of SketchUp's cloud. All right, so that should be enough to get you started. We will talk about more concepts in upcoming videos, but if you have any questions about anything that I talked about, leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.